All right, so usually on Saturdays I do good news, and I'm going to do that again today. But we need to start with some dum-dum. And in this case, the dum-dum is RFK Jr., aka Wormbrain. So you may or may not have heard that RFK Jr. pledges an answer to the autistic epidemic by September. Okay. Epidemic? Does he fucking know what an epidemic is? But based on the comments he made about autism, I don't think he knows what autism is either. Oh, and spoiler alert, he's just going to decide, it's going to discover that it's vaccines, even though that's a long debunked conspiracy theory. And considering the person who started that theory was just trying to push his own vaccines, it is odd that that conspiracy theory lingers. I mean, look at the motivation of the original person who tried to claim the MMR vaccine causes autism, which has turned into all vaccines cause autism. And like I said, based on his comments, I don't think he knows what autism is. But anyway, I already read the headline. So the subheading is, Kennedy says he believes as many as 1 in 31 children have autism. Now, I remember my father saying that based on the symptoms of autism, everybody has some form of autism. There is something in those symptoms that you can point to and say, oh yeah, I have that. Like me, I'm an introvert. I prefer being alone. And I absolutely hate loud noises. But I don't believe I'm autistic just because, so everybody has something that they can point to on the symptoms and say, yeah, I have that. So, granted, he was trying to disprove the spectrum, but whatever. The point is that if you only look at certain symptoms, you could literally say everybody is autistic. And I'm concerned that there is a movement to do for autism what was done at one time for ADHD or ADD, telling all kids have it, even though because they're hyperactive, because that's unusual for little kids to be hyperactive. So yeah, not saying that we don't have better ways of diagnosing it and evaluating kids with autism, but let's be sure that they really are autistic instead of, throwing that word around when the person doesn't necessarily have to be autistic. And considering Elon claims to be autistic, RFK Jr., I just realized RFK Jr. did a epic slam on Elon Musk. However, he pissed off a bunch of people who either are parents of autistic people or are autistic themselves. Anyway, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. made a significant commitment at Thursday's cabinet meeting at the White House, saying that his agency will know what has caused the autism epidemic by September. Good luck with that. Kennedy said that HHS had launched, at President Donald Trump's direction, a large research effort involving hundreds of scientists from around the world to look into the rising rates of autism diagnosis. At your direction, we're going to know by September, Kennedy said. We've launched a massive testing and research effort that's going to involve hundreds of scientists from around the world. Yeah, I just said it. They're better evaluation. So, solved it for you. Didn't have to wait till September. In September, we will know what has caused the autism epidemic and will be able to eliminate those exposures, he added. Considering he has been screaming from the rooftops, vaccines cause autism, even though now that there's a measles epidemic, he's suddenly perfectly cool with the MMR vaccine. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that he's going to want to eliminate vaccines. I don't have a doctor's appointment till October. Hopefully, he's not going to get rid of adult vaccines. He's only going to try to get rid of kids. Not that I'm thrilled about that, but since most people seem to think that everyone should be fucking selfish, yeah, I want to make sure I get my pneumonia vaccine. Trump commended Kennedy on the September goal, speculating without scientific backing. Isn't that true for everything he says? That the answer to driving down rates could be you stop taking something, you stop eating something, or maybe it's a shot, but something's causing it. Technically, you're right, something's causing it, but it doesn't have to be an environmental source. It could just be a mixture of things. Just like everything else. It can be a mixture of hormones, genetics. It could be so many things. It could be brain chemistry. I don't know enough about autism to know if I'm spouting just as much bullshit as they are, but at least that is stuff that's been shown to exist. Vaccines causing autism? Not so much. All right. Kennedy and Trump have both made it a priority to understand what's causing the rise in autism rates in the U.S. Scientists have been studying the cause of autism for decades and have identified genetics and several other factors as possibly playing a role. Right, because these are people who actually know what the hell they're doing. It is true that estimated autism rates have climbed in the past 20 years. However, experts say these rising rates are likely largely due to better awareness, a wide definition of autism spectrum disorder, and better access to services, leading to more children being screened and diagnosed. It's possible that a yet unknown factor is also contributing to the increase. And that's where my dad was mocking the autism spectrum, because to him, autism are those who are nonverbal, who are on the classically diagnosed autistics, as opposed to, yeah, this person is leaning towards autism but is still high functioning. Which, based on the symptoms, is pretty much everybody. So anyway, in 2000, approximately 1 in 150 children in the U.S. born in 1992 were diagnosed with autism. By 2020, 1 in 36 children born in 2012 were diagnosed, according to data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. At the cabinet meeting, Kennedy said that he believes those rates have risen, per new data to be released, to 1 in 31 children. In a later interview on Fox News, The Story with Martha McCullum, Kennedy said the National Institutes of Health would oversee the study and that it would look into everything. We're going to look at everything. Everything is on the table. our food system, our water, our air. We will find out what's triggering this epidemic, Kennedy said. We know it is an environmental toxin that is causing this cataclysm. Through research at NIH, we will find an answer to this question. Okay, number one, no, we do not know it's an environmental toxin. You're talking out of your ass. And I thought that the NIH was defunded. So how are you going to use them to do this research? I'm sure they have better things to do than come to your conclusion. In his confirmation hearing, NIH Director Jay Bhattacharya said he fully supported childhood vaccination and didn't generally believe there was a link between vaccines and autism. But he said finding answers on the rise in autism cases generally was a vital public health goal. Like I said, the people who are severely autistic, that might be a worthwhile goal. I don't know. But a lot of people don't think that just because their kid is autistic that they're broken, that there's something wrong with them. Isn't Tim Waltz's son autistic? He seems perfectly fine. Republican Senator Bill Cassidy, chairman of the Senate Health Committee, encouraged Bhattacharya to look into autism rates, but strongly dissuaded him and Kennedy from plowing the barren ground of investigating vaccines and autism because it had already been debunked multiple times. If we're pissing away money over here, that's less money that we have to actually go after the true reason, Cassidy, a doctor, told Bhattacharya during his hearing. But Kennedy has also brought on a well-known vaccine skeptic, David Geyer, to study the connection between vaccines and autism. The Washington Post and New York Times have reported. The concern, experts say, is that while investigating more into research could provide answers, Kennedy has also frequently raised the question of MMR, measles, mumps, and rubella vaccines as a link, despite dozens of studies debunking the claim. And like I said, now that there's a measles epidemic, suddenly he thinks that getting the MMR vaccine is just fine. It's easy to spout bullshit when there's no consequences to said bullshit, but now that there are, suddenly he's changing his tune. For how long is a different story, but the elevated platform for vaccine hesitancy poses a particular risk as hundreds of measles cases are spreading across western Texas, largely in unvaccinated communities, and 2 unvaccinated school-aged children have died. Despite Kennedy's efforts to investigate vaccines and autism, he said in an interview with CBS News on Wednesday that he encouraged vaccination, a notably supportive departure from some of Kennedy's past comments. The government's position, my position, is that people should get the measles vaccine, he said, though added that it shouldn't be mandated. Okay, now I'm looking for... Let me see if I can find this. Oh, come on. Okay, let me just... Okay, there's another ABC article. Oh, come on. Where is it? Let's see. I'm looking for, because he said stupid shit like, autistic kids will never go on a date. What? Let me try that. Because, I mean, some of the things he says are just absolutely bonkers. Okay. So here's another one from NPR. I think it's NPR. RFK Jr. gets backlash for saying people with autism will never pay taxes, hold a job, go on a date. I mean, are you kidding me? First off, that's your first concern is they won't pay taxes? Kind of on the nose about what you think that people are there for. To pay taxes so people like you don't have to. But anyway. So this is from WBZ in Boston. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is getting backlash after he made disparaging comments about people with autism. In a press conference on Wednesday, the Secretary of Health and Human Services listed activities that he says people with autism will never be able to do. These are kids who will never pay taxes. They'll never hold a job. They'll never play baseball. They'll never write a poem. They'll never go on a date. Many of them will never use a toilet unassisted, Kennedy said. Does this man know what autism is? I would love to have him... somebody should ask him, define autism. Seriously. I don't think he knows what autism is. People with autism and their families are taking those comments to heart. Pam Palmucci of Boston, whose teenage son Will has autism, says he has proved that autistic people can live productive lives. Will Palmucci said he likes to watch movies, play the guitar, and talk to people. He recently was accepted into college. I knew I could do it, he said. He said Kennedy's comments put far too many people under the same umbrella. What people tend to forget is that autism is sort of like a spectrum. You know, just because you have autism doesn't necessarily indicate that you're incapable of doing anything, Will Palmucci said. Now, like I said, severe autism, yeah, they're probably going to not be able to do certain things. However, even severely autistic people, that just means that they're generally nonverbal. So that doesn't mean they can't learn a skill. It just means that they're going to be in themselves. You know, that they would have to have a very specific environment, but they could still do things. It depends on what sets them off. Because like I said, I hate loud noises. That doesn't mean I'm autistic. So if I were to get a job, I'd like to get a job where I'm not exposed to loud noises. I'm sure that sort of accommodations can be made for even those who are severely autistic. Like I said, it depends what of the symptoms they have and how severe it is. All right. Another Boston mom, Andrea Natalie, said Kennedy's rhetoric on autism is nothing new, but she was still stunned by his comments Wednesday. Natalie said her son Julian has autism and lives a full life. My son Julian couldn't be further from a tragedy, Natalie said. At the news conference Wednesday, Kennedy announced a plan to study whether environmental toxins have contributed to the rise in autism diagnosis. Now, before I continue, again, now Elon initially said he had Asperger's, but apparently that's a term that's no longer in use. That just because it was diagnosed as as autism in adulthood, that doesn't mean that it's Asperger's. It just that was a debunked name. I can't remember the exact reasoning for that. But they're now lumping it all as autism. So he's throwing some serious shade at Elon, even though I don't think that Brainworm has, or I should say Worm Brain, has the intelligence to figure out that he was actually shading Elon, who claims to be autistic. This is a preventable disease. We know it's an environmental exposure, Kennedy said. Kennedy's conference came the day after Centers for Disease Control and Prevention released a report that found an estimated 1 in 31 U.S. children have autism, a marked increase from 2020. Autism experts applaud efforts to further understand the condition, but say the numbers of reported cases began to balloon as the definition of the condition expanded to include mild cases. All right, so, yeah, that's what I was looking for. The dumb responses to people with autism. Like I said, probably those with severe autism. Okay, yeah, probably. I mean, it's possible even those who are severely autistic can still do stuff. I really don't know. I don't know enough about autism. But to put everyone in the same bucket, especially when it's been autism spectrum disorder for decades now, this isn't something that they just came up with yesterday. This has been something that's been going on for a while. So, yeah. But that is the end of the dum-dum section. Let's get to the good news. And the first one, and this is from LGBTQ Nation. So, there's going to be a lot of very bizarrely worded things, like their love of mentioning that somebody is part of the LGBTQ plus community, even though it should have absolutely no bearing on what they're doing. But with that, out Colorado governor repeals state same-sex marriage ban. Colorado is for everyone. And this is one of those headlines that I take issue with, because that implies that the reason he did this is because he's out, so he has empathy for those who are out. And no, allies exist. You don't have to have, the governor didn't have to be gay in order to make this pronouncement. Anyway, Colorado law now protects marriage for LGBTQ plus couples should federal marriage equality be overturned. And that's a very real possibility with this group of dipsy doodles. In the wake of threats to marriage equality, out Colorado Governor Jared Polis, a Democrat, has signed legislation repealing the state's same-sex marriage ban. The ban has been invalid since the Supreme Court ruled in favor of marriage equality in the 2015 case of Obergefell versus Hodges. But the overturning of Roe v. Wade has left many fearing that same-sex marriage could be next on the chopping block. Should that happen, Colorado law will protect marriage for LGBTQ plus couples. And for those who don't see how this could lead to Obergefell falling, yeah, Clarence Thomas, or was it Sam Alito? One of those two wrote in their Dobbs decision that they should be revisiting other rulings that they find questionable, including Obergefell. So, Colorado is for everyone, Polis said in a statement. No matter who you are or who you love, Last November, the votes got rid of outdated language in our Constitution that bans same-sex marriage. This is a long overdue step in the right direction, and today's law I'm signing ensures that Coloradans can marry who they love in our Colorado for all. My question is, why did it take this long? But anyway, the freedom to marry who we love is a fundamental right, added State Senator Jesse Danielson, a Democrat and a co-sponsor of the bill. I cannot sit back and allow Coloradans to have their marriages and families put at risk. In November, Coloradans voted overwhelmingly to abolish the provision in the state constitution defining marriage as between one man and one woman, and the legislation fulfills the voters' will. State Representative Lorena Garcia, a Democrat, another co-sponsor, declared, Colorado voters have spoken. They want marriage equality constitutionally protected in our state. With this law, we're fulfilling the will of the voters and taking steps to protect marriage equality now and into the future. First Gentleman Marlon Rice thanked the bill's sponsors as well as the countless community leaders and advocates whose hard work has made today possible. He continued, this landmark legislation fulfills the hopes and dreams of so many across our LGBTQ and allied communities and affirms that progress hard won is always worth defending, and in the end, love triumphs over all. Since the presidential election, at least 9 states have introduced measures to end same-sex marriage rights, from resolutions calling for the Supreme Court to overturn Obergefell to bills to privilege heterosexual marriages, with some of the states referring to a new institution called covenant marriage, which would be limited to heterosexual couples. One problem. That implies Christianity. It does. I'm okay. It works for Judaism too. But what about everybody else? I mean, except for also Muslims. Except for the Abrahamic religions, there's no covenant. What are you talking about? There are those who do not believe in those 3 religions. They either believe in a different one or none at all, like me. So, why should I call a marriage covenant marriage when there's no covenant? Anyway. 2 justices on the Supreme Court have openly stated that they want to overturn Obergefell, like I mentioned. And the court has moved to the right since 2015. Justices Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Anthony Kennedy, and Stephen Breyer were all in the Obergefell majority, but have either retired or passed away in the last 10 years. Only one was replaced by a Democratic president. It is not clear if there are the 5 votes needed to protect marriage equality on the court if it were to take up a test case. I'm going to say no. No, I'm going to say there isn't. If it were brought up to the Supreme Court, they would strike down Obergefell. Of course, it should never have gotten to this point. I mean, people should be able to marry who they want, and as long as these are consenting adults, I fail to see the problem. If you don't want to marry someone of the same sex, fine, then don't. It's really that simple. 35 states have amendments or statutes banning same-sex marriage, and most would likely go into effect if the Supreme Court were to overturn Obergefell. Because of the 2022 Federal Respect for Marriage Act, though, state and federal governments would have to recognize same-sex marriages performed in other states. So at least some people would have protection, but you shouldn't have to, there shouldn't be a crapshoot of deciding okay, I live in a shithole state, so my marriage isn't recognized. I mean, that's just shitty. Same thing for the women in Dobbs. You shouldn't have to suffer just because you were born in the wrong state and can't afford to move to another state for whatever reason. Anyway, that is the first good news article. So now we have this one. College cleverly keeps its LGBTQ plus center open despite laws against DEI. While other schools are shutting down their queer student centers, one has found new ways to pivot in compliance with new restrictions. Numerous colleges nationwide have shuttered their LGBTQ plus centers under political pressure to end all diversity, equity, and inclusivity, or DEI, programs, but not at Utah's Salt Lake Community College, or SLCC. It's nice to know that of all the places, it's in Utah that this is happening. And more people should point out when people say that there's something wrong with DEI and ask them what they have against diversity, equity, and inclusion. And some people add the A for accessibility. And see if they, number one, if they squirm, or if they truly don't think that anybody but cis straight white males should have anything in life. Peter Musman was hired at SLCC in 2019 to help open up its Gender and Sexuality Student Resource Center, an office supportive of LGBTQ plus and female students. The center is open to all students. It has a drop-in lounge, offers connections to community groups and resources, and hosts events, programs, and trainings for affinity months like LGBTQ plus History Month or Women's Heritage Month. Musman, who currently serves as the center's manager and an SLCC's assistant director of cultural programming, oversaw the center exclusively until October 2024, when the Utah State Legislature passed HB 261, a law that prohibits state-funded colleges from discriminatory practices that favored certain identity populations over others. Then last February, the U.S. Department of Education sent out a letter pledging to end all federal funding to any school with DEI programs. Now, my only question about the Utah legislation, does that include ladies' night? Does that include men-only clubs? Or is this only about gay people? I'm really curious how far they go with the non-discrimination. By having programming or spaces or things that were exclusive to a certain identity group, it was considered discriminatory, says Musman, who spoke to LGBTQ Nation as a private individual and not as a representative of the college. Nevertheless, SLCC has shifted the center's role, he explained, and its marketing now makes it explicitly clear that the center serves all students, just through a lens of gender and sexuality. Our center never excluded anyone from any programming, any services, any resources, Musman said. We were not checking IDs at the door. We have a lot of straight students coming in and getting resources. We have a lot of cisgender students coming in and getting resources. So we were never engaged in the discriminatory practices that were outlined in HB 261. However, the law prohibits any activities that teach that any individual's personal identity characteristics are inherently privileged, oppressed, or oppressive, or that socio-political structures are inherently a series of power relationships. These restrictions could potentially make it difficult for any college professional to discuss the role of political oppression against LGBTQ plus and women, especially when observing any affinity month like LGBTQ plus History Month. So, how the fuck do you teach slavery then? I'm really curious. Under this law, how the hell do you teach things like slavery? Because if that is an oppression, I do not know what it is. So, seriously, are Utah schools just not going to teach about slavery? I'm really, really curious how. I mean, it's great that he found a way around this problem, but there are still problems. So, but let's see. Despite this, the Department of Education noted that schools can hold programs centered around educational, cultural, or historical observances such as Black History Month that celebrate or recognize historical events and contributions and promote awareness so long as they do not engage in racial exclusion or discrimination. How? What? If you're teaching about Black cultural figures, are they saying that if you teach about Black cultural figures, you have to teach about white cultural figures? I mean, that's just called education. Nobody during Black History Month exclusively talks about Black people in Black history. What school do you go to? I'm very confused. To comply with these directives, Musman said the center now highlights contributions from women or LGBTQ plus historical figures rather than the specific oppressions they face. I would love to know how they do that. Because, like Harriet Tubman, she became famous because of the Underground Railroad, because she was a runaway slave. How the fuck do you explain Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad without explaining slavery and the fact that Black people were oppressed? Still doesn't answer my question. We can talk about how these communities are thriving. We can celebrate achievements. We just can't say something like, queer people are oppressed and need to be recognized, Musman said. A lot of what these bills and these laws and these mandates are forcing us into are semantics games. And it's challenging, it's frustrating. So I guess kids just have to read between the lines when discussing someone like Harriet Tubman, that she probably was a runaway slave because of how she was treated, as opposed to out and out saying that it was because of her treatment, or just the fact that, you shouldn't be buying and selling human beings. Okay. Despite the frustration, Musman has also seen some opportunities to engage people on gender and sexuality issues in a different and possibly more accessible way. The center used to provide LGBTQ plus awareness training that trained different campus departments on things like pronouns and the history and culture of the queer community. Now the center offers a Gender and Sexuality 101 presentation that looks at how gender and sexuality have been expressed in nature, history, culture, and biological differences. Musman said presenters make it 3/4 through the presentation before they even mention any queer terminology. I've been teaching these courses for a long time, and when we start the conversation, like talking about power and privilege, which are kind of like these political buzzwords, I see people in the audience kind of like turn off. They shut off or they get angry and defensive, and it derails our conversation, Musman said. But when I have been able to change the language and use more neutral terms, instead of saying privilege, talk about accessibility or opportunity, they stay engaged longer. So basically, you have to trick them into thinking, because that is literally what privilege means. While he's not speaking as an SLCC representative, Moosman thinks it's important to share the ways his school has been navigating these policies, both as a form of educational solidarity and also as a potential roadmap for institutions navigating similar political challenges. As I'm watching these LGBT centers shut down, it makes me sad, of course, because these centers are saving lives. These centers are serving students in a way that they're not getting at home or elsewhere. But even more, I think we see nationally how quickly and how easily people are bending and breaking under this pressure instead of trying to find new ways and pivot to continue to serve students through creative measures, he said. How do we find creative ways to still engage, to still serve our communities, to still show up and exist, especially when we are representing government entities and being restricted through laws? Moosman asked rhetorically. Citing philosopher Cornel West, Moosman said that people need to develop the ability to be protean, which Moosman defines as the ability to be flexible, to change without losing the core of our purpose and our passions. We can continue to do what we need to do while matching the energy of the situation, of the environment, right, Moosman said. So institutions that are funded by federal dollars, institutions that are funded by state dollars, that are being forced to bend with these new laws and these new mandates, it's going to require us through many creative ways to be protean. All right, so that is the end of that article. So, I don't think I can really add anything to anything that we've talked about today. So with that, I will see you guys in the next video.